Planning an event and wondering how you can give your attendees the best experience possible? Take advantage of customized meetings with Hilton that make it easier than ever to incorporate health, wellness, and great breaks. Hilton will help you build an extraordinary meeting that attendees will remember. To book your next meeting or event, go to meetings.hilton.com.
Are you a follower?
Okay, so we're gonna probably add.
Welcome to Gather Geeks, a podcast by BizBash, the place where people passionate about meetings and events come together. Here are your hosts, BizBash CEO David Adler and Editor-in-Chief Beth Kormanik.
Hi, David.
Hey, Beth, here we are, another Gather Geeks podcast.
Our guest today is Kris Coratti, Vice President of Communications and Events for the Washington Post. The Post refers to its events as live journalism, where its journalists interview people such as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Vice President Mike Pence, as well as non-politician newsmakers and leaders, all in front of a live audience. She's been in the job since 2016 and has worked to define how events fit into the broader company strategy at the Post. And from there, it's about executing the events so that they make news, promote the brand, and incorporate sponsorships in a way that doesn't compromise the paper's journalistic reputation. David, this is another episode in the Spark Change series. Why did you think of the Washington Post?
They're the ultimate people that spark change. When they get those right people in the room, it's not about who is even speaking. It's how people are reacting to what they're hearing and making policy changes on a dime, basically. They're saying, oh my God, I heard something really interesting. I have the power to go back to my office to write about something or to change my policy. So they're the ultimate way that people spark change, in my opinion.
They certainly have a large reach, as we'll hear with the numbers that they attract for these sessions. It's interesting, though, because this trend of media companies discovering events as a way to add revenue and build their brands, it's really no longer a trend. It's a reality. And this, I feel like this has to be one of the fastest growing segments of the industry.
Yes, and I always use this line, which I get a little bit of pushback from media companies, that content is king. When part of it is contact is king, getting the right people in the rooms to talk to each other. And that's what happens because the people that are coming to some of these high level topics are actually gathering for the first time or together in sort of weird groups in a sense, because they collect the right people for the right topic.
Well, we're going to hear about the issues I brought up earlier, as well as about live streaming strategies to help prep your speakers, which kinds of sponsorships work best, and the nitty-gritty of how much to overbook a room to ensure it's full. High level, in the weeds. We're going to get into it. Let's listen.
So Kris, you have one of the most incredible jobs in the most incredible places in the world at the most incredible company, doing work on the side of the gods, in my opinion. Tell the audience what you're doing and why it is so cool.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. I do think the Washington Post is the coolest place on earth. And I think my job is the coolest because I get to run all of corporate communications and publicity for the Washington Post, which means I get to work basically with every department in the Post, including our exceptional newsroom, led by Marty Barron, our executive editor. We work with these reporters to get their work out, to make sure they're all over TV and radio, and that sort of people think of us as the main source of any kind of news you could want across the country, which, right now we really think of ourselves as a national and international media brand, which is different than a few years ago, right? So that's been a lot of fun.
It really is amazing. I grew up in Washington. I had the habit. I've been a subscriber to the Washington Post, and I was a paper boy for the Washington Post as well. And so for me, I was told that, you're not really in the media business, you're in the habit business. And every morning getting up and reading that paper was the centerpiece of many people's and my own life. So it is iconic to even talk to somebody who has a job of responsibility at the Post, because Ben Bradley was my hero growing up, and Donald Graham was my hero, and Catherine Graham. And it's sort of like I feel like I have this, relationship, a family relationship with the Washington Post. It's really
And
fabulous.
what's great about that is those heroes, I mean, their legacy is still such a big part of the Washington Post. But under Jeff Bezos and our publisher, Fred Ryan, it's really given us an opportunity to take that incredible reputation and truly follow through, sort of serve a national and international audience. And sort of part of my job, right, is making sure that people across the country and around the world think of the Washington Post, read the Washington Post, develop that habit that, you were just talking about, that was really part of that local fabric here in Washington, D.C. Now the idea is that should be everyone everywhere thinking of us as their sort of core news source. So that's sort of one part of my job, which is great. I have two others that are exceptionally wonderful, and one of those is sort of our corporate social responsibility and sort of community programs. And then I also run Washington Post Live, which is our live events division, which is, an incredible live platform for our news reporters.
Can you go in? I mean, the reason that you're on Gather Geeks is that we're doing this podcast on sparking change. And the fact is that we cover the face-to-face event industry, which is really something that the Washington Post did a lot, but never took it as seriously as they're taking it now. And one of the things I'm really proud that you have done is created the trust I used to think that the people in the event industry were sitting at the children's table for Thanksgiving. Now, right. I think that we are so pivotal in the strategy of many media companies and other companies. Talk a little bit about that and how it happened that this has become such an important part of the Post.
Absolutely. Well, I think that, I think the Post knew that events were important. And I think that because it was sort of a new concept, this is sort of years ago that these conversations started, right? That they knew they wanted to do it, but didn't necessarily know why or how it fit into the broader company strategy. And, though over the years, I think the various teams who have run live events did really interesting and important work. When they had me take over this business in mid-2016, the first thing I wanted to do was really figure out the identity for this. And the reason was, right, to your point about sort of sitting at the kids' table on Thanksgiving, that was really how it was viewed. And it was viewed that way by the most important internal constituency, which is our newsroom. And if you don't have that buy-in from the newsroom, if you can't utilize the power of your Pulitzer Prize winning reporters, then for a company like ours, I didn't feel like we could win without them. So my first goal was to really make them think about Washington Post Live as another news platform, just like the newspaper's a platform, our website's a platform, the mobile phone's a platform, frankly, social media, all these different ways that our content lives or that people get our content, whether it's on Apple News or Snapchat. These are all platforms. That the live platform could be a powerful one.
So how did the light bulb go off in the actual people in the newsroom that suddenly got on board and followed your leadership? Like, what was the specific thing and as sort of an advice point to everyone else listening as well?
Sure. Well, the big light bulb was showing them that this was a news product. And the way that I did that was I talked with our publisher, Fred Ryan, who's an absolute visionary. And I said, we really need to be able to have budget to do news events that are just purely newsworthy and not necessarily worry about the money piece of it yet, right? Because the fact is, Washington Post Live is its own little business. But we needed to be able to invest in it before we could get the returns. And so we went out and I was able to go to the newsroom and really put together some news-based events, bring in newsmakers, not worry about timing or sponsors, but have some of our top reporters get on stage. And then we prepped them. We said, this is not a soft marketing chat. Do the reporting. do the interview. That's what people want to come see, right? They want to feel like they're in the room for this incredible reporting that they read on our pages every day. That's what's exciting, So once we were able to do that and they saw that news was being made, right? Not just the excitement in the room, but that other media outlets were then writing from our events, it just really caught fire. I think people started to quickly understand, oh, wow, I could get a lot of attention for the work. I can actually do reporting. They'll help me get to some of the top newsmakers. And it became a valuable resource. And to me, that's how it had to start.
And it's interesting that you said that it became a news source. The idea that you're actually overseeing, you're overhearing an interview that's going on in the same way that a news reporter would do it on the phone or in person or in their office, right? In a sense. So there must have been an interesting thing when the light bulb went off in the audience too, that, oh my God, that's news. How did that feel? I mean, did you know it while it was happening?
That's an interesting question to ask. Did I know it while it was happening? I mean, I feel like that was the goal. But when you imagine, we also had to teach the audiences, right? So we had to teach the audiences that we bring into the room, but also our digital audiences or our broader reach audiences, that they should pay attention. And so a big part of that was making sure that we were giving these interviews life and legs beyond what was in the room. And then when people realized, oh, wow, the interview that normally happens over the phone that I read some, sound bites from, I can actually see the whole thing unfold in front of me. That really, that's a really exciting prospect, I think, for people.
Did you, it seems like also a lesson that I'm hearing from this is unscripted is better, like not as polished as it should be, that break the fourth wall a little bit. It seems like in order to get news, you can't know that you're going to get news.
Right, exactly. I mean, so we do all sorts of different kinds of events. It may be that we bring in a big newsmaker and cover, a wide range of topics with them. Or it may be that we pick a specific topic and really dive deep. And I think that's also something that sets us apart, right? I mean, you can read an in-depth article that goes through all of that, or you can see sort of a 5-minute cable hit with somebody. But what's great about a live event in that unscripted way is you get to sort of follow the story where it goes as it unfolds. You get to spend time with it. It has time to breathe, which I think is unique.
Is that the format that you found that works the best in terms of the getting? I always think that everything comes down to Maya Angelou, that they're not listening necessarily to what you said, but how you made them feel, that they're feeling like they're in the action.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that's where, obviously I love talking about the content of events because, in my world, I think that's really important. It's important for the Washington Post brand, but that's not all I think about when we put together these events. Like I said, we really curate the in-room audience because we want them to be sort of relevant to the topic that we're discussing. And why do we do that? So that beforehand we can create an atmosphere where they're talking, they're meeting each other, they're getting excited. That in the room, they're tweeting about it to an audience who's going to follow them because they care about the topic that's happening on stage.
So walk us through that. Walk us through the curating of the audience, Washington Post style, in terms of like how many people are in the room theoretically, and what times are the best times that they start, and how does it work?
Sure. So, we could have anywhere from 150 to 350 people in the room, depending on the event and the topic. And the way we look at audience, I always talk about audience in sort of 3 parts. The first is the in-room audience, and I talked a little bit about that in that we want those to be sort of the influencers in the space, the people who know about the topic, the folks who others would look to learn about the topic, because then, word of mouth, social media, all of those pieces become a lot more powerful, but also the networking time that we provide those folks becomes valuable because they're all sort of working in a sphere around this topic. Not necessarily all in the same industry, but all with some level of expertise. So that's sort of my level 1 audience. Then we think about the broad reach audience, which is that digital piece, which is so critical. We have this incredible digital platform. So to me, it would be mind-boggling if we didn't take advantage of it. So we live stream every single one of our events on our homepage, on other platforms. And we typically have, depending on the event and the time of the event, we could have anywhere from 50,000 to 300,000 people watching live. And I mean actually watching, right? Not scrolling past it. And so that broad reach audience is really important because to me, there's so much more value that an event can provide beyond sort of that 2 hours on stage. There's legs every which way if you take advantage of them. And so that's one of the ways that we take advantage. And the third way is we invite outside media. It's not closed. We make sure that C-SPAN can show it live, NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox, that they can all take our feed live or send their own cameras. And then there have been times, David, where I have had someone text me that they just saw a clip from my event on MSNBC before my event is even over. And to me, that's incredible. It tells me we're doing something right. So those are sort of my 3 levels of audience.
What's interesting that I'm seeing from this is, so you have the interview on stage, a reporter talking to a subject. You have a town square of all the relevant people that get to meet all the time on that particular topic, whatever it is. And then you get the outside world viewing it. So you're doing the best of all worlds to create this town square, literal town square in all different ways, which sparks change in a sense, because when people talk to each other, you never know what's going to happen.
Absolutely. It's so fascinating because we do a lot on Twitter during our events. So we take questions from all over the country through Twitter that our folks then ask on stage. And, we do a lot with our various speakers to make sure that they're promoting on social media. And, one of the most incredible events we did just a few months ago was a criminal justice reform event right before the legislation was going to be voted on, up or down, basically, to be passed. And we had this really remarkable event. We had senators from both sides of the aisle. We had all of these experts talking about this legislation and this topic of criminal justice reform. And, we ended up having Kim Kardashian West tweet about it because, again, the right people in the room who people follow when they want to learn about a topic, right? They're tweeting. And she ended up retweeting someone who was actually inside our event. And of course, that just blew up the impressions on social. But that's sort of the idea, right? Is that you utilize all of these audiences to spread legs to the journalism you're creating.
Well, it is, and it is sparking change literally in real time. And it is a perfect example of how taking these meetings and events outside the box and making them so universal can have a huge impact on everything. So you think it's the model that other media companies are going to use, or that people will just use in general for the way the country can work better?
For the way the country could work better.
Yeah. It's a fairly basic way of saying it.
Sure, if done right, this is one of those things where it is, to me, always useful if you can put together a both civilized and interesting conversation that really lets people more deeply understand a topic. And that's a big thing for us at the Post. And this is where, I do hope other media companies think about it this way, which is we are very careful about making sure that there's balance, making sure that there's civility, making sure that, someone can get a much more complete picture of a topic when they come to us, instead of just one side of a topic or people sort of yelling back and forth at each other. So that's been a big piece of it. I do think that that's important. I do think it's a good model for a live event.
Do you see that actually having impact in the individual that attends in that because it's a civil conversation and you're not as entrenched in one point of view or another, that you actually see positions change in real time?
We do track on social sort of what that conversation looks like and how it unfolds, right? Because a lot of what we're able to see, particularly from people either in the audience or watching online, and sort of how they're responding. Now, can I say that broadly minds are changed? No, but what I can say is that what we see on social are very thoughtful tweets. Very, very, very clearly having listened and paid attention and taken something of interest. So what we don't see is that sort of overly political, nitpicky, sort of sniping back and forth around a topic on an event, even if the topic we're covering may have political undertones. I feel like what we see is a really civilized discourse, which I'm always thrilled about.
Yeah, no, that sounds like part of the solution. Do you have topics that you stay away from, that you see that you want to do that you haven't done yet, that could be really enhanced by this sort of this event is a platform, it's not an event.
Right. I think so. The lens that I look at this through is, would our newsroom cover this topic?
Right.
And if our newsroom would cover the topic, then I would do an event on the topic. Now, there are going to be topics that I will do unsponsored that, I would have the company pay for because there's news value. And then there are plenty of topics that would be covered by our newsroom that would also have interest from underwriters. So that's sort of the two-pronged approach to make sure that we don't have to take things off the table.
And are there things, let's talk about the business model first. You're pure, okay. It sounds like you're pure sponsorship as opposed to you're not making money off of ticket sales, or are you?
Right. No. So, to me, it would be so odd to curate this audience, invite them in, and then say, "Oh, and pay me X amount of money."
Right.
So we've decided to go the route of corporate underwriters.
Mm-hmm. And does that are they just sponsoring the event, or you're creating a complete publishing platform for them, or is it a one-off deal? Like, how do you, from a nuts and bolts perspective, think about sponsorship?
Sure. Well, it's all of the above, right? Because there are some companies who want the larger package, right? They want to do a whole custom brand studio campaign with ads on the site, take some of our newsletters, and then also have a live component. There are some companies that just want that live component, that just sort of want to be there in the room. So it really depends. And that's part of what our sales team talks with all these various clients about, is sort of, to me, if I'm talking to a client, my first question is always, what are your goals? Who are the audiences you're trying to reach? What is it that you want out of doing an event like this? Because, I've sat on the side of being pitched, being a sponsor, because I run all of our CSR programs. And, I always like to see sort of what we can do, to help our community. But also, if it's just a pure sponsorship, okay, well then what benefit to the brand is there, right? How am I connecting with your audience? Because if I'm going to sponsor, it's to help and also to make that connection with people. So I try to apply that on the flip side to make sure that we can really think about how to connect those dots. Because at the end of the day, David, the content is the post. So a sponsor coming in doesn't get a white label event. They don't get to pick and choose what the topics are, who the speakers are. They come for the brand adjacency.
And what do they get? What are the physical things that a sponsor gets in the room besides access to maybe saying hello to the talent or their name on things? Like, what are the sweet spots when you go and you pitch a sponsor?
So to me, the sweet spot is helping a sponsor convey their message, right? Because that's sort of the power of an event, is the intimacy. That's also why we have to be very careful as the Washington Post with what we do with underwriters because of that intimacy. We have to make sure we have clear lines on things. But where I like to help them is in finding the smart ways to connect. So there's a few ways to do that, right? For the in-room audience, that pre-event time is really critical, because if you take advantage of doing something exciting in the space we have outside of our auditorium, that is an incredible way to connect with people and draw them in. And we've seen it done to great effect. So you can sort of capture those influentials in the room.
Well, give us an example of what that looks like for people who...
Oh, sure. I mean, there's so many different ways to approach it, right? I mean, it could be a more intimate VIP breakfast. It could be, I had a sponsor once we were doing AI, and they brought in all of these AI startups, and we set up all these screens, and they had all these visualizations that they could walk people through on how AI works. And I mean, people just hung out, and we almost couldn't get them into the room for the event because it was such a cool setup. I think you have to have something where people feel like they're learning something, that it's something they haven't seen before. You know, I tell sponsors, don't bring a table and put, stacks of collateral on it. That can be part of it if you have things you want people to take away, but it's such an opportunity to show versus just give something that tells.
To be part of the event, to really be part of the experience.
To be part of the experience, right? And then so they move into the room for the actual content. And at the highest level of sponsorship, I work with the sponsors to create their own, what we call a sponsored segment. So we give them time in the programming where we're very clear with the audience that this is from the sponsor, but done well, it is just as valuable in terms of content as anything else, because a lot of times our sponsors are also experts on the topic, and they can bring a really interesting perspective to a conversation. And I've seen a few where the conversations are so dynamic that the audience is applauding at the end.
So what does that look like? Like, is it an interview on the stage? Is it a video that they're going to do? Is it like some sort of get up and interact with the audience? Like, what is a good sponsorship at these kinds of events look like? What do they look like?
We give them pretty wide latitude, but what I've seen work the best is when you either set up a very dynamic, moderated conversation, or you do something that truly has multimedia components where you can be sort of interacting and addressing the audience. And I think that, either can work. It really depends on the message. I think for certain things, if we're talking about artificial intelligence, for instance, that can be cool to utilize our big screens in the room, sort of show people, walk them through things. I think people love that kind of stuff, doing demos, or a really dynamic conversation happening with a good moderator, right? The quality that they would expect from the Washington Post. And I think that those kinds of things, then what happens is that content is the sponsors to own, right? It's their sponsored segment. They can use it for other marketing. They can, I've seen sponsors use it in their ads. I've seen sponsors do all sorts of things with it to then give that legs beyond the event itself. So there's a lot of value there, I think. What I've tried to do over time is, as we build our audience, as we build the brand, I always think about, okay, how can this convey in a safe way, in a not line crossing way? How can this convey to the sponsors? Because that's why they pay, right? They pay the money to have that connection with the audience, both in the room, but the broader digital audience, which we can deliver in a way that others can't.
We're going to take a little break and come right back after this message from Hilton. So when's the big event? Hilton's here for planners with their exclusive customized meetings. Become a wow maker and save time by letting Hilton help you present an extraordinary event, one that leads to memorable and meaningful connections. Visit meetings.hilton.com and let Hilton help you. One of the I want to sort of explore the problem with sponsors not taking the content seriously. Is that an issue? Like, I know in the old days, they would pay for the ad and then they would have the ad pub set, they called it, and nobody would really care about the content. But are people getting very, very more intensely involved in that part of the conversation, or is it still a fight to win?
Putting me on the spot.
Yeah. Can they do it better? Can we do that better? It's like, I'm advising my clients because they don't know our medium as well and how to use the power of face-to-face. We still have an uphill battle in telling people how to use a face-to-face audience, or even the extended leveraged amplified audience.
So, I mean, I think the answer is there are some who really know how to do it, and there are others who don't. And so what I've done over the past year is start to build up in our business unit, so not on the news side, but in our business unit, folks who can actually act as consultants to our sponsors, who could actually help them think about how to make the most of that time. Because, I do think that some have staff or agencies who are really great, who can prep them and who can put something together. And then there are those who just think, oh, it's great, I've got this airtime.
Right.
But don't put that much thought into how to fill it. They're like, oh, it's easy. I'll just get someone to ask me a few questions and I'll do my commercial and it'll be fine. But we've put together a whole document of best practices. We have people who actually get on the phone who do the prep work, because we found that, look, this is our program. We want this to be exceptional at every single minute, no matter who's programming that minute. Yeah. And so we've really started doing much more in the way of, helping consult with our sponsors, because we want them to be successful so that they come back.
Yeah, no, I think, one of the things I'm seeing when I speak at conferences all over the place is that nobody even, a lot of organizations do a terrible job of even coordinating the content of the speakers, what the speakers are going to say, and coordinating the content of what the sponsors are going to say. It's kind of like they do the logistics of it, but nobody gets into this sort of this gray area that I think is probably the most important piece.
Oh my gosh, early on you think, oh, I have the best reporters in the world. I'm just going to put them on stage. They're going to do these great interviews. Mm-hmm. And what I realized is these guys are busy,
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Even though this may be relevant to their world, they have 500,000 priorities. And so, our production team sits with the reporters, they work, they prep, they make sure they have time to get the reporter to focus on it. And we found it completely changed the course of how these events unfolded. It's so much more dynamic. It's so much more exciting. And so we're taking a lot of that learning and applying it now, to the sponsor pieces that go on stage.
What is that sort of secret sauce that you discovered in terms of making a speaker, even a reporter or a sponsor, more dynamic? Like, what is the technique that we can sort of let everybody overhear our conversation?
Well, I think it's first understanding what they need, right? So some of our reporters don't need anything. Some of our reporters, just need to have the time. What I think is really valuable is thinking about, again, what's the goal of the conversation? So let me take a minute and just focus specifically on the sponsor piece. What is the goal of the conversation they're trying to have, right? They're clearly up there to convey something. So what is that? And then what I typically do is take a look at what they've done in the past. So, do I need to get them in here and prep them and practice on stage and almost put my PR hat on and do pure media training to get them comfortable being on stage, learning how to speak with authority? Or is it really helping them think about the content and how to tease out the content in a way that feels newsworthy and exciting? Because a lot of times you may have people who are great speakers on stage from a sponsor standpoint, but haven't given much thought to how they want their story to unfold. And so it feels either overly stuck in talking points or convoluted. So helping them on the content piece, but I've also had sponsors who have really amazing messages that get lost because they're just too soft-spoken or aren't making eye contact, or things that, with a few weeks of work would have probably come out a lot better. So that's a lot. Those are the two sides of it that I look at when we help them build these.
And are the visuals important, or is it the standing up on stage? You said authority in there, which sounds like a very big word for you.
Well, look, this is where I think these are universal learnings, right? It doesn't matter what kind of event you're doing, but if there is going to be any sort of speaking program, whether it's someone standing up on stage and reading remarks, or a fireside chat, or a panel discussion, you have to have people who are dynamic, because the fact of the matter is, when you talk about visuals, the visuals that matter is treating it like television. Because if you're fidgeting, if you're swiveling, that's what people are going to pay. They're not going to hear a word you say.
There's the little things that really matter.
It's amazing. The research shows, first and foremost, if people are watching you, that it is so much harder for them to hear what you're saying if there's something visually distracting. So that's one. But speaking with authority, when I say that, I really mean, having a sense of what you're trying to convey and saying it clearly and concisely in a way that people can understand. That is, whether that's in the words or in the delivery, both are critical, and not everybody gets both. And that's where the preparation comes in.
Is it practice? I mean, when print reporters are notoriously not necessarily as outgoing as a television person, and you see some of them cross over. But how do you know that you got a guy with great content, but you have to really pump them up from an oomph point of view?
Well, a lot of it is we have to test and try. So the nice thing is I have a testing ground, which is, my reporters go on television. So if they're new and they're untested, we do training. We see how they do just with us. We record them. We make them watch it. We give them feedback, and we keep doing that until we feel like they can do sort of the smaller, easier, sort of maybe a local affiliate TV. We build them up, right? So I actually have a way to sort of train people and see, okay, can they then make it on stage? And let me tell you something, David, you probably know this better than anyone. Moderating is harder than answering questions on television. So there's one more leap for them to make, right?
Yes. No, absolutely. I mean, the great, I think the future of our business is in these moderators that really listen and know how to respond in real time as opposed to following a script.
Yes. I mean, my God, it's so funny. Total aside, I will not name names, and this is not a live event related, thank goodness. But I saw 2 interviews be done with the same person. So it was 2 different interviewers, and it was for a film that's being done, but from 2 separate people. And I watched them both do this interview with the same executive here at my company. And my executive was fantastic. But what I found with the one person asking questions was it was more of a conversation. He was actually listening to what Fred was saying and asking him questions in return. And it ended up being so dynamic instead of the other interviewer who sort of asked him just a series of questions and stuck to his script. And so Fred did an incredible job, but the other guy got so much more content out of him.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was that's a real conversation.
And that's how you break news, because you're pulling people, like, you said that? Are you kidding? I just did an interview this morning with someone else, and all of a sudden they said, I just did the Jared and Ivanka wedding back when. And all of a sudden, you what? You did the Jared and Ivanka wedding? And I got so much information out of that. It was totally unscripted. It just,
oh my God.
It was pretty funny, actually. So it's sort of like, it really is. The live event also creates deadlines inside a company. How do you use it to motivate and mobilize the rest of the organization?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, it really does touch so many different units of the company. And I think that part of it is the communication, right? We keep a really clear, tight timeline that covers sort of every piece of an event and every single, not just owner, but who else has deliverables on that piece. And so a lot of times we're able to stay on top of having, 20 events in the hopper because we have this incredible organizational system. Because to me, it's the only way it works, right? Because you've got not only you've got the events you're producing, you've got the events that you're trying to get out in the marketplace and pitch. You have this whole life cycle that never stops, and
Right.
you're always in every part of it. So, for us, it's got to be that constant communication. My team, my live team, does, we call them a scrum every morning. So we literally stand up, there's no sitting, we stand up for 10 to 15 minutes and just run through. And it's remarkable how much you can get done in 10 minutes when you're sort of task oriented. And it really helps everyone stay on deadline, because the salespeople know, okay, look, if we're going to do X by X date, we've got to close this by this date. If we're going to get this invitation out the door, we need these marketing materials done by X date. And it keeps us on task.
I can talk to you like all day long, so I'm not going to do that, I promise. But
that's sweet.
the idea of recruiting people to come to an event, and I had Tina Brown on a few years ago, actually, and she talked about the Queen. That people are spending more money now on recruiting people to come to their events than actually getting the celebrities and the speakers, because it's getting those right influencers and curating the attendance is so much more important than almost anything else. And that people are so kind of rude today and they just don't show up at things. What are you seeing? I mean, you're seeing people that want to come because we're media companies and we have the same thing. But how do you see that whole recruitment process, and how many times you have to call somebody to make sure they're going to come?
I mean, that's a huge issue. It's a huge issue.
Yeah.
I mean, we've found that we have to, while we're curated, in terms of getting the highest level people, I want sort of the C-suite, the executive level folks in the room. We have to overbook by a significant amount if we want a full room. And, part of it too is, I think there's different levels of dropout depending on your structure. For us, it's a higher level because people aren't putting out their own money to pay for tickets. They get really excited and then they think, oh, I've got this meeting and I can just watch it online. It's easier for someone at an executive level to say, my day just got too crammed.
Right.
And so that is a big thing that we battle against, which is, finding that right. It's sort of a mix between art and science in terms of how many people you get to respond so that you have a packed room, that it's packed but not overpacked. And I feel like, over time, my team has gotten that down to more of a science than an art, thankfully. But it is certainly an issue.
So,
it is absolutely an issue.
So go into the science a little bit to help everyone else. Is it the calls the week before, the day before? Is it the emails? Is it the knowing what the percentages are in terms of, you're going to have to overbook by 50% in order to get 20%, what are your rules of thumb, if you can share, unless if it's trade secret?
Oh, no, sure. Absolutely. And it's probably going to sound less exciting than it feels to me. But, the team has a whole marketing play that they do in terms of invitations. So they have a sense of, okay, here's the number of invitations we need to do. Here's the reminder emails that we send. We have an email that we call Arrival Details, sort of a really beautifully laid out, everything you'd want to know about making it easy to get here, and also reminding people that they said they were coming here.
Guilt is the best thing.
Right, exactly. There's sort of that piece of it. But then there's also, by event, by topic, the team has started to figure out, okay, if this is the topic, this is the percentage by which we have to overbook the audience to get a full room. And it really does change depending on the topic, the time of day. And that's okay, because I do think there are some topics, I think you were telling me before this call about, reaching sort of smaller but highly important audiences. I think that's actually critical. It's important to think about. So I don't worry too much about if it's a 125 person audience or a 350 person audience. we know what we're aiming for, how to fill the room, and then based on the topic, what percentage over we need to get to our optimal number for that topic. So that's a lot of how we look at it, because to me, I want the right people in the room, but I want it to be full. I want there is that excitement about being in a room full of people and people reacting and responding. So that is important to me.
In terms of time of day, what's your favorite time to do these kinds of events?
For us, again, depending on the topic, a lot of our newsier topics, I find we get the biggest numbers in the morning. So not too early in the morning, DC. So I feel like 9 a.m. has been really good to us. And that's a critical thing to figure out. Because every city, I find it's a little different. Chicago, people are like there at 7 in the morning for their breakfast. Oh, absolutely. And here, what's so crazy is, a lot of folks actually do events early in the morning, 7:30, 8 o'clock. But what we found is we can both get the audience, but we then also get the biggest digital audience, because, the rest of the, at least on the East Coast and certainly through the Midwest, are in the office at that point.
Yeah.
And even on the West Coast, we find that, folks will tune in if we've got their attention. So it's a good time because people can throw it on in their office and sort of watch and listen and follow along. And that's, that's a big piece of wanting to make sure we're getting the influencers in the room and the broadest reach possible online.
Okay. So F&B, what is your biggest, is it coffee, I guess, is your biggest thing? When people go crazy when there's no coffee at these morning events.
Oh my gosh. I have this incredible person who runs our event logistics. She's like the most brilliant events person I've ever known. And she, literally, she makes sure everything is set and everything is beautiful. And she's also very budget conscious. So somehow she's found a way to make people feel like they're getting, $1 million for something that's totally reasonable for our budget to be doing a lot of these things. But yes, absolutely coffee. Although, the one thing, David, this is going to sound so silly. The one thing I want to do that we haven't done is I want to set up like a little to-go coffee stand for when people leave, because we do all this stuff beforehand and then people leave and go to work. But I want to have custom sleeves. This is so silly. I should be talking about content, but I love this idea of sending people off with to-go coffee.
Yeah, with the sponsor's name on it.
Since you asked me about food and beverage, that's going to be my one thing.
And the other thing is, I'm wondering if you're noticing, you go to these conferences and everybody tries to do these healthy foods, and then they go for the donuts and the muffins and all the healthy foods left. Are you seeing that? Or are you seeing people actually going for the healthier food? Just anecdotally.
Oh gosh, I don't even know. I think it's a mix.
Look next time.
It's leftovers.
Only people like us watch that stuff.
Now that I think about it, because I don't watch the food that close, but now that I think about it, I do feel like our leftovers are always yogurt and fruit. So maybe you're right.
Yeah, because I think that the social physics of where the food is placed, and the social physics of where the coffee is set up, and the social physics of however it makes conversations happen. So it's really critical that even the placement of those things matter nowadays. And it's very interesting how our whole job is to get people to collaborate and talk to each other, and the placements of the food is critical.
You say that. I would never have really thought about that until my events person came up to me, and my sort of the one who oversees our whole logistics group. And she said, I feel like the way we're set up gives people too much space to kind of find these little niches, and they're not interacting as much as if we had it set up X way. And, the second we changed that, it was like we were putting on different events. People were talking and sort of running into each other, not in a bad way, not in an overcrowded way, but just kind of like they had to crisscross in a way that I would never have thought of that, right? That's just, but I do think I had a little bit of a snobbish attitude about it, which I was like, I'm focused on content and this is going to be so important. And then I realized, oh, wow, no, actually there is a strategic value to thinking about where you're putting these things if your goal is to really create an opportunity for conversation.
Right, because in the conference business, the hallways have become more important than the plenary sessions because nobody talks to each other in the hallways. They're talking to each other. So you have to create ways to create collisions and democracy among the people and the ability to talk to people and approach the shy people as much as the outgoing people. And so, I mean, the one thing I've learned about our business is everything is important. And, the stuff that you thought was not important becomes really important. Like the event industry itself, we were we were not taken seriously, as I said earlier. And now it is critical because that one idea that people have that they connect with could change the world, especially in the world that you live in. If two people with opposing point of view come together because they heard something on your stage, that creates policy, that's unbelievable. So that's what Absolutely. I love about what you do from the whole concept of creating change and facilitating it through events. So it's great. Last question.
Thank you. Sure.
Last one, I promise. What's next?
Oh my gosh. What's next from an events perspective, or what's
in
next
general,
in my world?
From your perspective in your world, like what do you want to do that you haven't done yet, other than the coffee cup sleeves to go?
Oh my gosh! Don't hang me on that one. Oh wow, gosh, there's so
you have
much.
every opportunity. I think what you can think of, you can do, especially in the organization that you're in.
And the organization has given me that opportunity multiple times over, which I'm so thankful for. Part of me feels a little bit like, as I've grown these programs over time, and taken on new ones, this sort of becomes my focus. And I feel like, Washington Post Live, still in some ways, it feels like my little startup. I mean, we've been doing this now 2.5 years, and I feel like there's so much more to be done and refined there. But I also recently, with my publisher, started the Press Freedom Partnership, which is not necessarily event related, although we are doing events around this idea. But that is something that I'm really excited about right now, that I just got off the ground last fall. And, I feel like really taking an opportunity with our platforms to showcase journalists around the world and sort of the dangers that they face, and also advocate for detained journalists around the world is an incredible opportunity, and one that I'm excited to dive more deeply into.
That's fantastic. Well, Kris, thank you so much. I would love to continue this conversation with future podcasts. I think our audience is going to learn tremendous amounts from you and watch you. You're only 2.5 years old in this particular startup, so I think that you've got lots of mountains to climb, and we look forward to being part of that.
David, thank you so much. This was a fabulous conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right, back in our podcast studio. Thanks for that, David. I thought this was so interesting, including the discussion about live streaming. I guess the first tip to going viral is to get Kim Kardashian West to retweet content from your event. Can we all do that?
Who would have known that she was so interested in the Washington Post?
Yeah, the Post has a broad mandate here. Everything is live streamed on the homepage and on other platforms. And this works well for them because there are only so many people that can be in Washington in that room at that time. And their goal is this mass dissemination. But that's not the goal for every event. And I'm curious how you feel about this, because is there still a fear about giving content away for free on a live stream and not selling tickets? Like, for instance, we don't live stream our sessions at BizBash Live, our huge shows. We want there to be exclusivity at that moment.
No, I think people are going both ways. Some people are actually charging big dollars for the live streaming as well, and people are paying for it. So it's not cannibalizing their attendance in many cases, their attendance revenue, which in many cases for a media brand counts even more than the attendance in the room piece. that they're actually able to monetize it. And also you get this sense of FOMO when you hear about it on a streaming system that you want to actually attend it in the future. You're building an anticipation for, you want to be with the cool guys. And so I think it works. I mean, it really works in combination. And I think people have to have a broader imagination on the idea of disseminating of information and how it gets stronger and stronger the more people know about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder if there is how that's worked for them. If there's people who have watched the live stream and said, I need to be there.
Yeah, no, I would bet so. What's also interesting about this conversation was that while Kris would let her event logistics team deal with the event logistics, she found that it was more important to get into that and make sure it was done correctly, because the event logistics actually impact on the content in many ways and the experience that an audience member has. So they don't just give it over to the logistics people alone, that it's really well thought out. It's part of a strategy in many cases.
Right. The details set the tone. The Post also preps their own journalists to be able to be effective moderators and interviewers on stage. And she went into the ways that they do that. David, I know you do a lot of speaking. What are some of the best tips you've been given about how to be effective on stage?
You know, I really found being yourself is more important. And the likability factor, people sort of don't necessarily equate. When you smile while you're giving your presentation, like, be happy with it, be joyous while you're doing it. And it gives you a better sense of a presentation as opposed to being nervous and scared. And I think you can see fear in a presenter a lot. And if you can somehow relax and just enjoy it, it makes a huge difference in the training. I love the way she said some of her journalists are not good at speaking. They may be the most brilliant people in the world, but they don't give off that sense that you want to listen to them. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can go on forever on this. So I think we better.
Yeah, I'd add in.
What do you think?
I think that you're right that people can sense fear. I think bringing a sense, it depends on the conversation. Yeah. If you want to have a sense of joy or if you want to have more of a confidence, because I mean, I imagine in some of these interviews, there's tension and it can be good, especially you are talking to the Vice President of the United States. You've got to ask the hard questions. Right. This can't be trying to be friends or buddy. So some of these different kind of feelings are okay to evoke.
Right.
But not fear.
Well, I think that all about this is using sort of all of the different aspects of attention grabbing to get people interested in the topic. And, you know, when I talk, I'm not talking about too many controversial things. But if I am interviewing the Vice President of the United States, I want to have more drama in terms of, I want this guy to answer something that he wouldn't normally answer. So it's a lot of watching the journalist be a journalist in real time. Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
And to translate that for events writ large, you know, really think about, this kind of goes back to what Kris was saying, think about what you want to accomplish on stage. Yeah. And then coach accordingly.
And you just don't wing it. That's the one thing that I've learned, that everything has got to be planned. And the people that wing it, you see. And while you applaud them for their casualness, you sort of see the fact that they didn't think it out.
And sometimes as an attendee, you feel disrespected, right?
Yes,
you know, you're spending your time to be at this event. You want to make sure it's worth it.
And they've come in and they've done no real prep and they're just phoning it in.
Right. So don't do that.
Don't do that. So Beth, what else is going on at BizBash?
Well, on Tuesday, which is the day when, for most of you that you'll be listening to this, we published the Southern California Top 100 for 2019. This list gathers the top 100 events in several categories. And I'll tease that there's at least one new number one this year. So it is never the same list of 100 events each year. And we're so excited to be publishing this. And Gather Geek's own Claire Hoffman compiled the list. You can check it out on bizbash.com.
Great. Well, before we end, we like to thank the people that helped bring this podcast together. And the aforementioned Claire Hoffman is invaluable to our podcast world. To Rebecca Pappas, who gets it out there and helps distribute it. And to Dave Nelson, who is our producer, that it makes us sound better than we are. So until next time, what do we say, Beth?
Gather on.
Gather on.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. We can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Player FM, Google Play, and Pocket Cast. Be sure to leave us a rating and review. It helps others discover the Gather Geeks podcast. We'd also love to hear from you. You can leave feedback on Twitter @GatherGeeks or leave us an email, gathergeeks@bizbash.com. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode of Gather Geeks. Until then, gather on.